But I have found that defining manhood is very difficult, even deceptively difficult to define. In my studies, I discovered 4 popular approaches to really uncovering this task. First, some people choose to define manhood as contrasted with womanhood. And there are some who take this approach. Unfortunately, this is a mistake because ideal womanhood is not always in contrast to ideal manhood. In fact, most of the time, the attributes and character traits are the same, but lived out a little differently. And of course, I believe a great man should elevate and bring out the best in a woman. Second, there are approaches that tend to describe manhood as something that is contrasted with childhood. Now, while this definition might seem more accurate, one that only contrasts manhood with boyhood is not endearing to the innocence, receptivity, and faith of a child. Keep in mind that even Jesus encouraged childlike attributes in adult men. Yet I also agree that manhood has some attributes that are only manifest in adulthood. Third, there are many men who choose to define manhood based on their role or position in life. An example of roles would be like husband or father or employee. There are volumes of books written about being a better husband, fatherhood, and an employee in the workplace. And each of these books has taught me something special about being a man given a unique context. But I must pose the obvious question. Am I less of a man if I'm not married, have no children, or don't even have a job? While in my journey of becoming a man, I will always need some direction on how to navigate the challenges of these roles and places in life, I believe our definition of manhood must transcend these roles and positions. And fourth, there are still others who might define manhood as something achieved through positive virtues or maybe avoidance of vices. Now, we do make a lot of progress here. For evidence of this approach, we just turn to one of the greatest works on this subject of all time, Aristotle's treatise in Neo-Manichaean ethics. His studies on this topic has influenced thinking for 2,000 years, and it's the greatest work of its kind, as related to excellence in manhood in his day. The major issue I have with Aristotle's view is that fundamentally he encourages us to pursue virtue, or he calls it moral excellence, from within ourselves as the primary agent that directs our development in a very self-interested way that results in the praise of men. While I believe virtue needs serious effort and attention, the Christian man, for us, our strength comes from God himself through the power of the Spirit, not from self. And the motivation is primarily out of love of God and not for the praise of other men. But still, we don't have a definition. You know, at some point I began to wonder if I could find an adequate definition. But if we don't define it, the culture will define it for us. Today, the entertainment industry is where we hear some of the loudest voices on the state of manhood. They present one depiction of manhood after another. We're inundated with images and stories of manhood as a form of self-manufactured machismo, which has given men, I think, a bad name. We watch movies that glorify the womanizing activities of James Bond, the stoic toughness and emotional distance of Jason Bourne, and the obsession for greed and power of Gordon Gekko. But this is not the only portrayal. At the other end of the spectrum, they also perpetuate a view of man as the punchline in the household joke, or presented in the shadow of women and children who are far more presentable and articulate, educated, successful, and leadership-oriented. And while I have been very entertained by these macho adventures and comedy sitcoms, I don't prefer some of what these images convey about manhood. They reflect some of what we hate about men, either complete self-interest or indifferent attitudes. And perhaps there's some truth to this. Maybe these portrayals are just small reasons why we've lost our voice in the world. And to be honest, I don't want either, nor to be thought of as either. So what we need is a better definition and a better source for understanding manhood. Because listen, we cannot pursue that which we have not defined. And we do not want to pursue that which the culture has defined. And who better to define manhood than the creator of men, who designed the masculine heart? So as I've read through Scripture, I realized that God had given us the true definition of manhood in the ultimate man, Jesus Christ. That Jesus was God's representation of his ideal man, an image that we damaged way back in the first pages of the Bible. You see, the great sin of man has always been our apathy. And for men, I believe this is our primary sin, even more than pride. This sin was center stage in the garden when the woman was tempted. And man witnessed this moment and stood there and said nothing and did nothing. The man failed to live out his divine calling, and for thousands of years, God looked for a man. And while we saw glimpses of men, they were just dim reflections of the man that God was seeking, until one day, God decided to self-provide. And Jesus came to redeem God's image by living out ideal manhood and saying and doing things that integrated his manhood, leaving us an example to follow. So as I read through the New Testament, I identified 9 attributes that Jesus explicitly said and did in the absence of manhood that I found very compelling. And this is the content for our time. 9 attributes that Jesus said and did that I believe he wants us to say and do as men and as followers of Christ. And I will warn you, these are challenging, but also very rewarding.